The stars were dying, not with fire and fury, but with silence. Entire constellations dimmed across the galactic rim, as if the heavens themselves had drawn their final breath. Suns bled into blackness. Worlds spun cold and forgotten. In the darkness between the stars, vast sepulchres stirred, cities of metal and shadow that had slumbered for over 60 million years. They did not dream. Machines do not dream. And yet, something ancient awoke. Welcome, friend. Before we begin, know this. We truly love and care for you. This story, though vast and heavy with tragedy, is a gift for your imagination, for your heart, for your sleep. So let me ask, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. It began on the tomb world of Mephetran, once a vibrant colony beneath a sapphire sun, now a dead husk adrift in endless night. Beneath its irradiated crust lay a Necron tomb complex, miles deep, layered like the rings of a tree, each level older and more sorrowful than the last. Within its innermost sanctum, a sarcophagus of black stone and obsidian hummed with returning power. Circuits surged, dust evaporated, and from stillness, purpose returned. The stasis seal cracked open with a soft hiss. Ancient hydraulics exhaled the breath of eternity. The being within did not rise swiftly. It had no need to. Time itself bowed to its will. His name, once spoken in reverence and defiance alike, was Zarek the Eternal Light, once a philosopher king of the Necrontyr, now a lord of metal and memory, cast in living necrodermis. He opened his eyes, or rather activated his optics. The chamber filled with a pale green glow as the gaze of Zarek returned to the universe. He did not speak, not yet. His thoughts came in floods, data, memory, pain. He saw a vision of his once flesh form, tall and regal beneath alien suns. He remembered laughter, though he could no longer replicate the sound. He remembered betrayal, the offer of godhood from the Citan, the shattering of the soul, the cold gift of biotransference. Zarek stood. His metallic form was flawless, adorned with glyphs of a dynasty that had ruled when stars were young. His body was a masterpiece of engineering, yet in that perfection was a profound flaw. A hollow echo where once dwelled a soul. A servitor construct hovered into the chamber, silent and obedient. It carried no name, only purpose. It bowed before him, light flickering through its fractured data core. "Report," Zarek said, and his voice reverberated like a cathedral collapsing. It was not a command. It was an invocation. The servitor pulsed. Tomb World Mephetran has experienced 0.004% degradation. Local sun has collapsed into white dwarf state. Galactic coordinates indicate significant stellar drift. Estimated time since last activity, 61 million years. Zarek said nothing. A pause, long even for the undying. And then a whisper escaped the echo of his processors. Too long. Memory fragments flickered like static. His dynasty, the Sautek, the eternal flame of reason, of law, of will, were they still intact? Had the slumber been a success? Had the enemies of old, the arrogant old ones, the usurping younger races, perished? Or had the galaxy birthed new monsters in their absence? He began to walk the Hall of Echoes. As he passed, stasis coffins stood in rows. 1,000 nobles, 1,000,000 warriors, all sealed in undreaming death. He paused at a particular sarcophagus. Its nameplate, though eroded by the slow corrosion of millennia, still bore the sigils. Tajan, seer of the Sky Forge, his twin brother, once flesh, now this. The past struck him like a solar flare. He had not wanted this. Not for Tajan, not for anyone. But he had made the choice. Or had he? In truth, the Citan had offered deliverance from pain, from disease, from the agonies of Necronta immortality. They had offered immortality, gleaming, eternal, perfect. Zarek had seen the future they promised, a future of dominance, a future without death. And yet, what they had taken was more profound than death. They had taken meaning. "Wake the cryptech," Zarek said. The servitor hesitated, an infinitesimal glitch. "Are you certain, my lord?" The cryptech designated a Kemet was unstable. "So is the galaxy," Zarek muttered. "Wake him." He did not wait for confirmation. His steps echoed down the long corridors, each one shaking off the dust of 1,000,000 centuries. The tomb complex flickered to life around him, lights igniting, data streams reawakening. The tomb world did not roar to life. It whispered, like a soul relearning how to breathe. As he walked, he passed a great mural, a wall of polished onyx etched with gold and emerald filaments. It depicted the fall of the Necronta Empire, vast fleets crumbling under solar storms, cities devoured by cosmic radiation, the skeletal remnants of a people crying out for salvation. And below that, the arrival of the star gods, the pact with the Citan, the final scream of biotransference. He stared at it for a long while, not with reverence, but with guilt. "I did this," he said aloud. The servitor behind him said nothing. It couldn't understand. Zarek clenched his hand into a metallic fist. "I chose to save my people. But at what cost? What are we now?" He reached the central throne chamber. The cryptech's sarcophagus hovered in stasis, locked in triple containment, a precaution even in deathless sleep. Achamet had been brilliant, visionary, reckless, and utterly loyal. But there had been anomalies, dangerous experiments, dreams of reversing the irreversible. Zarek hesitated. What if Achamet had been right? He touched the activation rune. The tomb's walls trembled, systems engaged, data screamed. And in that moment, a new signal flared in the void. Ancient Necron code pulsed across subspace, touching other tombs like a ghost's caress. Elsewhere in the galaxy, deep beneath forgotten stars, stasis protocols began to fail. One by one, the tomb worlds stirred. The Necrons were waking, and with them, the past would rise once more. Zarek returned to his throne, not to sit, but to watch. He looked out at the holographic display of the galaxy before him. 1,000 new empires burned in the void. None remembered who ruled before. None had learned from what had come before. And now, history would come for them. He whispered to no one, "Let them see what we became and what we lost." Above the tomb world of Mephetran, the stars flickered, and one by one, they began to die. In the stillness of the tomb, memory returned like static through fractured circuits. It did not come cleanly. No, like a corrupted data stream, it came in fragments, moments, echoes of a time when his voice was still flesh, when his steps fell upon stone rather than steel. Zarek stood alone in the upper gallery of the Hall of the Undying, his servitors dismissed, his throne unoccupied. Outside, the dead sky of Mephetran stretched across the void, veiled in the frozen rings of forgotten battleships and asteroid husks. But inside, there was movement. The tomb pulsed. Power nodes surged. The beat of awakening flowed through the arteries of this dead world. He walked slowly, each footfall clicking like a priest's metronome. The gallery was a place of contemplation, built not to house war engines or rank-and-file warriors, but memory. Along its long metallic walls, carvings from the Necrontier Age adorned the surface, etched by stasis-bound artisans, long lost to time. Scenes of celebration, of ancient unity before the long war with the Old Ones, when their kind still looked to the stars with wonder, not bitterness. Zarek's optics narrowed. One carving showed a child reaching toward a twin sun, a symbol of promise. His mind jolted violently. He had a son, not a soldier, not a noble, but a boy who laughed with a crooked smile. He remembered holding him during the twin eclipses of the celestial divide, telling him that one day the stars would belong to their people. The memory stung, not in his mind, but in that impossible, unreachable place that once held a soul. He could not remember the boy's name. The thought hollowed him more than the passage of 60 million years. I have endured empires collapsing, galaxies dying, yet I cannot recall the name of my own blood, he whispered. Because you are no longer meant to, a voice replied behind him, flat and resonant, wrapped in reverb and static. Zarek turned. The cryptek stood in the doorway of the gallery, his silhouette long and lean, a latticework of flowing cables, chrono runes, and oscillating coils wrapped around his form. His necrodermis was heavily modified, almost grotesquely so. Spines of copper and obsidian jutted from his back like broken wings. His eyes pulsed with volatile green energy. Akemet, Zarek said, voice taut. The cryptek inclined his head. You summoned me. I did. Then you know what that means, Akemet replied, stepping into the chamber without hesitation, as if the centuries had been but a moment for him. You have questions, and I have answers. Dangerous ones. Zarek said nothing. He turned back to the wall, placing a cold metal hand upon the etched image of the child. Do you remember? He asked quietly. Akemet approached slowly, his footfalls unnaturally soft for something so massive. I remember all things. That is both my gift and my punishment. His name, Zarek said, his voice barely audible. What was his name? Akemet was silent. Then, after a pause longer than most mortals live, he answered. Tirek. Zarek froze. Yes, Akemet continued, voice heavy now. Tirek, born beneath the storm moons. He loved the sky. He feared nothing. He was the last thing you thought of before we stepped into the biotransference core. You begged me to find a way to preserve his memory. But I failed. Zarek turned to him sharply. No, you did more than fail. You let them take it. You told me there would be safeguards. Akemet did not flinch. I told you what you needed to hear. The words rang like a blade drawn across stone. Zarek took a step forward. So you lied. I gave you the only chance we had to survive. Akemet snapped, his calm veneer fracturing. The Old Ones had sealed our doom. Our bodies were fragile, broken things. Our people were dying in droves. Biotransference was the only path left. And you thought our souls were the price? No, the cryptek whispered, quieter now. I thought they would be temporary casualties. I believed I could recover them, isolate the mind-soul pattern, restore what we lost. I spent millennia trying. My Lord Zarek's gaze was burning. And Akemet's optics dimmed, and I failed. Every attempt twisted them, made echoes, distortions. At best, copies with rage and fragments of personality. At worst, monsters. The flayed, they stood in silence for several moments, the hum of tomb systems thrumming in the background. Zarek turned away again, staring into the wall. And yet, you still search. Akemet's voice was soft again. Yes, because if we cannot recover our past, we are not a people. We are a program, looping endlessly through war, conquest, and silence. Another moment passed. "You could have told me," Zarek said, eyes locked on the mural. "You could have told me before we stepped into that machine." Akemet's voice broke just slightly. "You would have refused, and the Necronter would be extinct." Zarek clenched his fist. Then maybe that would have been mercy. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber dimmed. An alert flared in the edge of both their optics, an awakening signal echoing across the planets. "Stasis grid, you activated the tomb-wide initiation?" Akemet asked sharply. "I had no choice," Zarek replied. "The galaxy is not what it was. I must know what remains. I must know if any others remember." Akemet hesitated. "Many of them will not thank you. Many have succumbed fully to the programming, the directive. They live for war, not remembrance." Zarek nodded solemnly. "Then I will remind them, or end them." A pause. Then Akemet stepped forward, something clenched in his hand. He extended it, a small metal device, compact, ancient, humming with stored data. "What is it?" Zarek asked. "A recovered mind seed, taken from a failed experiment, but one that held anomalous resonance. I think it may be." Tirek Zarek recoiled. "You kept this?" he said, voice jagged. "I kept it in case," Akemet replied. "I knew what it would mean." "I know the cost." Zarek took the device slowly. Its surface was warm, impossibly, somehow warm. The sensation rattled him more than anything he had experienced in millennia. "Then, perhaps," he said slowly, "not all is lost." Akemet turned and walked toward the door. "I'll prepare the awakening protocols," he said. "But know this, there are others waking across the stars. Not all friendly, not all sane." Zarek did not look at him. Let them come. Alone again, he turned back to the child on the wall. The name returned to his lips, tentative, reverent. "Tirek." The lights dimmed as more sarcophagi activated across the tomb. The dead were waking, and with them the broken memories of the past. The void is never silent. It hums, vibrates, sings a dirge in frequencies too ancient for mortal ears. And across the far reaches of Segmentum Obscurus, deep beneath a planet swallowed by time and ash, that dirge found a listener. He awoke not to ceremony nor reverence, but to static. The sarcophagus cracked open in sudden spasms of light, and the stasis chamber flooded with flickering energy. Power surged like a heart reviving. Symbols ignited across ancient walls, and within the humming chamber, a figure rose slowly, stiff, deliberate, like a god reborn in judgment. He did not speak, not yet. He remembered too much. His name had once been etched into the annals of the Triarch. Setek, the dissident flame, Pharaon of the Kemet dynasty, once brother in arms and rival in mind to Zarek, the eternal light. The schism between them had torn through the court like a fracture in reality. Where Zarek had sought salvation, Setek had seen something else. Ascendancy. Not the survival of a people, but their inevitable supremacy. He stood now, silent beneath the vaulted ceilings of his tomb world, Kama Prime, as activation glyphs rippled through the chamber. Automated systems chirped and hissed. The air, thick with ancient preservatives, began to purge. After millennia, his thoughts aligned. "Status report," he rasped, his voice rough with decay, intentionally left so. Where Zarek's voice had become smooth, regal, Setek had chosen to remain harsh, like rusted metal dragged against iron. A skeletal construct approached, its servos twitching unnaturally. "My lord, primary power conduits restored. Cryptex in partial awakening. War host status at 78.4%. External signals detected. Origin, Mephetran. The name hit like a cold lance through Setek's consciousness. Zarek. So he had awoken too. The past flooded his synaptic cortex. He remembered the last words they had exchanged in life. This is not salvation, Zarek. This is surrender, to which Zarek had replied. Then history will judge us both, Setek. He had hoped history never would. Setek moved to the central command dais. A hololithic image of the galaxy flickered to life, distorted, patchworked with gaps from 60 million years of data rot. Still, enough signals flickered. Warp anomalies, Xenos empires, rising threats. 1,000 flames lit across the stars where once the Necronter had ruled in silence. The stars have changed, he murmured. Another servitor spoke. Incoming transmission. Origin, Mephetran. Activation code. Zarek. He snarled. Display. A cold green hologram projected Zarek's face, regal and serene even in deathless metal. The message was simple. No request, no apology. The galaxy stirs. We must rise. For memory, for legacy. Awaken and stand with me. Or remain forgotten. Setek stared at the projection with contempt. For legacy, he repeated. He turned and stalked from the chamber, cloak trailing behind, like the shadow of his former mortality. Outside, the world of Kama Prime was slowly awakening. Monoliths rising from volcanic plains, scarabs chittering across ancient vaults, cryogenic mist flowing from the great necropyramids like divine breath. Thousands of stasis pods clicked open. Warriors stood. Eyes glowed. And yet, to Setek, it all felt wrong. They had been gods once. Kings. Why should they rise now to rebuild what was already stolen? As he walked through the awakening halls, another figure approached him. A noble, lean of build, missing half of its facial plating, exposing a cracked skull beneath. Vareth, High Nemesaur, Setek greeted coldly. Farron, the noble replied, bowing slightly. You seem troubled. Do I? Setek asked, turning toward the great window that overlooked the necropolis. Our people awaken to a galaxy not our own, and Zarek presumes to speak as if he were the voice of an empire. Vareth tilted his head. He did unite the Triarch in the final days. Setek's voice dropped. And what did that unity cost us? The silence hung thickly. Vareth changed the subject. What are your orders? Setek stood still for several seconds, his eyes scanning the stars. Send no reply to Mephetran, he said. Let Zarek wonder. Let him hope, but begin awakening our full host. Slowly, quietly. I want every cryptech reactivated. I want the archives unlocked. And I want the shard vaults inspected. Vareth paused. The shards? After what happened? I am not Zarek, Setek interrupted, turning sharply. He fears what we became. I do not. If we are to reclaim this galaxy, we must do so not as what we were, but as what we are. Vareth bowed again, slower this time. And if Zarek stands in your way? Setek's optics flickered. Then he too will be consigned to memory. Far across the void, on Mephetran, Zarek stood on the edge of a stasis field, observing the awakening of his elite guard. The cryptech Akemet approached, his voice unreadable. The activation signal has been received, he reported. And no response. But Kama Prime's tomb network is alive, power signatures rising. They're awake. Zarek turned slowly. Setek. Akemet hesitated. He may not side with us. I never expected him to, Zarek replied. He sees survival not as a gift, but as dominion. He turned back to the awakening process. Green mist billowed as more warriors stepped forward, soulless and silent. But somewhere behind their empty eyes, he hoped a spark still flickered. "Begin preparations," Zarek said. "We must reach those who remember, before Setek poisons what remains of our kind." "And if they choose him?" Akamet asked quietly. Zarek did not reply at first. Then we will mourn them. And we will end them." Back on Kamar Prime, deep in the subterranean archives, Setek stood before a sealed vault door, one ringed in black monolith script, etched with warning sigils. A dozen cryptechs stood behind him, chanting activation codes in sequence. The vault opened with a roar, and within lay containment fields humming violently. Suspended within, fragments of a being that defied logic pulsed with impossible energy. A fragment of a Citan. The whisper came instantly, soft, seductive, venomous. "You remember me, little king?" Setek smiled, not with joy, but with cold certainty. "I do," he said, "and now you will serve me." The tomb was dark, not the comforting dark of sleep, but a void where even thought struggled to survive, a place where echoes screamed and shadows remembered. Here, beneath the deepest vaults of Mephetran, Zarek stood alone before the Immortarium, a chamber sealed since before biotransference, locked by code and guilt alike. It was not a place of strategy or command. It was a place of memory. The room was circular, lined with towering pillars made of obsidian and star metal, each carved with scenes too painful to show the public archives. Scenes of what came before the fall, before the machines, before the curse. Zarek reached out with his mind. The chamber responded. Light shimmered, images formed in the air, noiseless and luminous. A flood of memories, fragmented and restored from data vaults deeper than language. He stepped into them, not as an observer, but as a participant. And for a moment, for the first time in millennia, Zarek saw the galaxy as it once was, and as he had once been. The world was bright. He stood on the cliffs of Dahak Prime, back when it was still fertile and covered in crystalline forests. Winds sang across silver leaves. Suns bathed the land in twin beams of gold and azure. The Necrontyr had lived here, not survived, not endured, but lived. Short, painful lives. Each day a struggle against the radiation sickness that riddled their bones. Yet they had laughed, built, hoped. Zarek turned to his companions. Flesh and blood. No necrodermis, no biotransference. He was young here, brilliant, afraid, and arrogant in equal measure. Beside him stood Tajan, his twin brother, his advisor, his anchor. "I heard the court is voting today," Tajan said, his voice soft, real. "Yes," Zarek replied, "on the Citan's offer." Tajan looked out at the valley. "I still can't believe we're considering it." "What choice do we have?" Zarek asked. "The radiation eats us alive. Every generation weaker. The war with the old ones has ground us to extinction. Biotransference is the only path forward." Tajan didn't answer. He merely watched a child run through the meadow below, laughing. Tirek. Zarek's heart clenched. The boy waved up at them. He remembered waving back. The memory blurred, shifted. Now he stood in the Hall of Decision, beneath the crystalline vaults of the Triarch. He remembered the feel of his robe's hem as it trailed across white stone. He remembered the heated arguments, the desperation, the rage. "The old ones have abandoned the stars," cried one noble. "We are forgotten, scattered, dying." Another, older, shouted back. "We do not bargain with gods. The Citan are not our saviors. They are stars given hunger." Zarek raised his voice. Then let the stars feed. If that is the price of our survival, we will pay it. I will not watch our children rot in their beds while we pray for mercy that will never come. And in that moment, the chamber erupted with applause and horror. The next memory came unbidden. The biotransference chamber, cold, sterile. Rows of Necrontyr in stasis, waiting for their souls to be stripped. Machines hummed. The Citan hovered above, formless light given voice. The being that spoke to them was called Niadrazath, the mirror of souls. It sang in languages never spoken by mortals. It made promises that dripped with honey and fire. It said, "You will never suffer again." And Zarek had believed it. He watched as Tajan was loaded into the transformation sarcophagus. He fought, but not violently, only wept. And Tirek, who was supposed to be spared, hidden away, was gone, taken before the vote had even concluded. Zarek had screamed, then truly screamed. But the machines did not hear. The Satan smiled. The memory burned. He staggered back from the image, his metal form hissing with reactive data overload. In the real world, Akemet's voice crackled through the chamber's vox. "Zarek, report. You've been offline for 12 minutes. He did not respond. His optics adjusted, the memories dissolved, the chamber dimming again. He stood once more in the tomb, not in the past, not in flesh, not in time. But something had changed. The guilt that had lingered in him like a shadow now swelled, sharp and undeniable. He had told himself he was saving his people, that he had sacrificed memory for survival. But now he saw it for what it was. He had chosen silence, not salvation. Akemet arrived moments later, descending via gravity lift, his form shifting and unstable, crackling with arcane coils. "You accessed the Immortarium," he said. "I had to remember," Zarek replied, voice low. "All of it. I warned you what it would do to you. You didn't warn me what it would do to them," Zarek replied, gesturing to the walls. "My family. My brother. My son, Akemet, said nothing. For once, the ever-arrogant cryptech stood still. "I watched him walk into that chamber," Zarek said. "I thought he was already gone. But he wasn't. He was alive, and I sent him into oblivion." "You made a choice all of us made," Akemet replied. "There was no clean path. The flesh had already failed us. The only question was, who would decide the terms of our extinction?" Zarek's gaze burned. "No. The question was, who we trusted to speak for us when our voices were taken. And I answered it with pride." Akemet approached slowly, placing a data core into the wall's console. A shimmering image of Tirek reappeared. Just a face. Nothing more. "I have the mind seed," Akemet said quietly. "It still carries echoes. Perhaps something of him still exists. Enough to restore. Enough to apologize." Zarek stared at the image. "I do not need forgiveness," he said at last. "But he deserves truth." A pause. Akemet asked, "And Setek?" Zarek turned away. "He will use our guilt to justify tyranny. He never sought remembrance, only control." "He's awakened a Citan shard," Akemet said grimly. "Preliminary analysis suggests Niadrazath." Zarek froze, then whispered, "The mirror returns." The tomb around them dimmed again. Alarms low and ancient flickered. More tomb worlds were awakening, some with clarity, others with madness. "The galaxy won't survive another war in heaven," Akemet said. "Then we must end it," Zarek replied, "before it begins." Far away, in a distant crypt world drenched in storms, a broken cryptech stood over a failed resurrection vault. Shards of identity flickered across his data core. In the dark, a tiny voice, Abu whispered. The vault doors of Kema Prime opened with a groan that echoed across eons. What lay beyond was forbidden, sealed even before the war in heaven ended, hidden beneath cyclopean seals and null-tech wards older than the Citan themselves. Setek stood alone before the threshold, his form wreathed in a corona of green lightning. Behind him, his cryptex chanted geometric liturgies to keep the containment fields stable. The air here was thick with raw pressure, not gravity, but intent. And inside the vault, waiting in pieces that writhed in defiance of physics, was Niadrazath, the mirror of souls. The star god stirred. The fragments pulsed with emotion, rage, hunger, glee, sorrow, all simultaneous and incoherent. No mortal mind could withstand the raw presence of a Citan. But Setek was no mortal. He approached the field slowly, dragging a chain of monomolecular runes behind him like a leash. The shards reacted violently, spiking light, shrieking frequencies, bending reality in flashes. "You are not the silent king," hissed a dozen voices at once, overlapping and discordant. "You are dust made proud. You were mine." Setek spoke calmly, his voice like stone on obsidian. "I was never yours, mirror. You gave us immortality, yes, but you took our souls, you asked us to." The chamber trembled. Setek stepped closer. "And now I ask for something more." The Citan paused, swirling like a storm held in glass. "You are bold, little godling." "I am Necron," Setek corrected, "and I will not ask again." He raised the control staff, and the containment field adjusted. The Citan's pain was immediate and immense, raw screams in 100 languages, spiking through the walls of reality. But Setek did not flinch. "I offer a bargain," he said. "Your power, channeled, constrained, and useful. Serve, and I will let you see stars again." The mirror shimmered with mockery. "And if I refuse?" Setek's voice turned cold. "Then I scatter you to quantum dust and cast you into the heart of a black hole." Slowly, a long silence followed. Then, with a flicker of ancient hunger, the mirror spoke. "Very well, little god." The pact was sealed in circuits, code, and forgotten energy. The mirror's shards coalesced into a floating crucible of light, bound in rune chains. A fraction of its power, leashed, poisoned, furious, was now Setek's to wield. From the shadows, Nemazor Vareth stepped forward, optics wide. "My lord, you actually did it." Setek didn't turn. "We are no longer scavengers among the dead, Vareth. We are the judgment of history, and the gods will kneel once more." He turned toward the command spire. "Recall the fleets. Begin Phase 2. Meanwhile, on Mephetran, Zarek stood in the Vault of Warnings, where only the silent king had once walked. The time for hope had passed. Now came reckoning. "The shard is bound?" he asked. "Yes," Achamet confirmed. "Setek has full war control. He is beginning resurrection protocols for dead worlds. But worse, he's issued a signal." "A signal?" "A call to rally." Zarek stiffened. "The fractured dynasties?" Achamet nodded. "He's offering unity. Not through memory, through power. He's promising a new empire. An iron resurrection." Zarek turned to the massive hololith of the galaxy. The Necrons star map flickered as dozens of tomb worlds came online. Kemet, Thanach, Velatrix, Thoris. Even the ancient wreckage of Drazak stirred. And the worst part, many were answering. "We are losing them," Achamet said. "No," Zarek replied, stepping forward. "We've already lost them. Now we must decide what we're willing to become to stop them." He turned to Achamet. "You said you still had the mind seed." The echo of Tirek. The cryptech nodded hesitantly. Zarek's optics flared. Then bring him back. Whatever it takes, Akhmet recoiled slightly. Reconstruction is unstable. His memory patterns were corrupted. He may not even recognize you. I do not need a son, Zarek said bitterly. I need a voice of the future, something Setek cannot manipulate. If we are to survive this second schism, the new generation must speak for itself. Akhmet lowered his head. I will begin the process. On the distant tomb world of Thauris, where glass dunes stretched for miles, and the sky was filled with shattered moons, the high Fyrak Saelira received Setek's signal. She had slept long and deep, her dynasty in near-total stasis since the war in heaven. Now her optics shimmered as she read the transmission. Power, order, ascendancy. The promise was old. The voice was new. Zarek offers memory, she mused. Setek offers dominion. She turned to her court, silent lords long buried. Perhaps it is time we ruled again. In the warped sector known as the Cryptus Expanse, a signal arrived too late. The tomb world there, Zengar, had awakened wrong. Its systems twisted, its cryptex infected with chronophage rot. Its Pharaon, a once loyal subject of the Triarch, now something else. He called himself the Last Thought. And when he received Setek's signal, he laughed with broken logic. Then he answered it with fire. Back on Mephetran, Akhmet's lab thrummed with volatile energy. The Mind Seed reconstruction array pulsed, trying to rebuild consciousness from digital scars. The process was excruciatingly slow, fragment by fragment. Then, a flicker, a pulse. The voice was weak, glitching. Father? Zarek stood frozen. Akhmet gasped. The chamber stabilized. Tirek, Zarek whispered. The reconstructed soul image flickered in midair, formless, barely humanoid. Data and memory stitched together by sheer will and pain. I remember the cliffs, the voice said, and the song of the silver leaves. Zarek stepped forward, his voice cracking despite his metallic form. I remember too. Tirek's image trembled. I died, didn't I? You were taken, Zarek replied, by my pride. I did not protect you. The silence was unbearable. Then protect others. Now, before more sons are lost. And with that, Tirek's image stabilized, green light forming a stable pattern. He lived again, in a way. Zarek turned to Akhmet. Prepare the broadcast. I want this signal sent to every tomb world not yet fallen to Sitik. Message? Akhmet asked. Zarek looked at the hologram of his son and then to the stars. We remember who we were. We are not machines. We are not tools. We are Necrontyr, and we choose to live. In the dark corners of the galaxy, ancient dynasties stirred, some with hope, some with fury, some with madness. The second awakening of the Necrons had begun, and this time the war would not be against the old ones. This time the war would be for their souls. The galaxy trembled, not with the roar of battle, yet, but with something older. A tension buried in the bones of a species too long entombed. The Necrons were waking, but not as one. Zarek's broadcast echoed across the void. It spoke not of conquest, but of identity, of memory, of the sins of the past, and the burden of surviving them. Setek's signal followed close behind, louder, sharper, promising unity through fear and strength. Two voices, two paths, and all across the stars, tomb worlds now faced the same question. What does it mean to be Necron? On Thauris, High Pharaoh Saelira stood before her court of 1,000 silent nobles. Her form was regal, wrapped in nanosilk and obsidian plating. Her voice, when it came, was ice wrapped in fire. "Zarek remembers pain," she said, addressing her lords. "Zetek remembers victory. Which memory will guide us?" The nobles murmured, flickering data nodes of agreement and dissent. Selira turned to her second-in-command, Lord Vadran. "If we join Zetek, we rise with certainty, power, dominion." "And if we join Zarek," Vadran asked, "we rise with purpose." She looked into the void. "Purpose may not win wars, but it may prevent them." On Drazak, where the skies were permanently choked with ion ash, the Awakened dynasty had no such doubts. Its Pharaon, once known as the Voice of Iron, now answered only to Setek. From his throne, he unleashed the first cohort of reclamation, a fleet of tomb ships, death arcs, and destroyer cults. The orders were simple: burn those who remember, silence those who doubt. The schism had begun. Zarek stood within the spire of ancients, watching tomb worlds blink to Setek's side in real time, each one a blade turned against memory, a dynasty lost to power. "How many have answered our call?" he asked. Achamet replied with a grim pulse of his data sigil. 12 dynasties, mostly lesser courts. Many are undecided. Several remain silent. And how many for Setik? 29, including Drazak, Zengar, and the fragmented remnants of the Star Eater court. Zarek nodded. "We are losing." Achamet leaned closer, but not defeated. In the center of the room, Tirek's reconstructed consciousness now sat in a containment vessel, a glowing sphere humming with intelligence. "I've stabilized his neural lattice," Achamet explained. "He's growing." Faster than expected, Zarek turned toward the vessel. "Tirek, do you understand what's happening?" The sphere pulsed. A voice emerged, calm, young, ancient. "Yes, a civil war among the dead." Zarek almost smiled. "Can you help us stop it?" A pause. Then, "No, but I can show you how to survive it." Setek stood aboard his command vessel, the Star of Oblivion, surrounded by crypts who bent like trees in wind as he passed. At the center of the bridge floated the Mirror of Souls, bound in rune chains. "You watch the future with envy," Setek said to it. "I shaped the first stars to dream," the mirror replied. "You now play at divinity." Setek's voice sharpened. "I do not play." He turned to his generals. "We strike Mephetran, now, before Zarek can rally more. We do not allow him a war of words. We give him a war of annihilation." Lord Vareth bowed. "The fleet is ready." Setek's hand ignited with green light. "Then let the second war of memory begin." Across the stars, beacons lit up, old pathways reactivated for war. Tomb ships emerged from the black, rising like ancient beasts from the deep. Zarek received the alert in silence. "He's coming," Achamet said. "I know." Tirek's voice whispered in the background. "If he reaches Mephetran, it will burn. You cannot win in space." Zarek looked to Achamet. "Then we fight him where we can." He activated the Tomb World phasing relay, issuing a single ancient command. "Operation Fracture, initiate planetary dispersion." Across Mephetran, the entire structure began to shatter. Not collapse, but fragment. Tomb districts broke apart, lifted into orbit, and vanished into localized dimension folds. The planet itself fractured, hiding its people in scattered reality nodes. When Setek arrived, Mephetran was gone. Only a signal remained, echoing in the void. "We are not yours." Setek howled, his voice shattering 3 servitors. "Find them," he commanded. But Achamet had encoded the signal well. The Necron data web was vast, but Zarek had learned how to hide from gods. The war would not be won in a single strike. It would be fought in shadows, in whispers, in choices, in what the Necrons chose to become. Back on the remnants of Mephetran, deep within a stable pocket dimension node, Zarek sat with the projection of his son. "We bought time," he said, "but not peace." Tirek pulsed softly. "You cannot force memory. Only preserve it." Zarek lowered his head. "I made so many choices, and lost so much. Then help others make new ones." Akemet entered, bearing new reports. "Sailora has declared for us. So have the minor houses of Triarch's End, a flicker of hope. But then, Drazak's fleet is heading for cryptos. Millions still in stasis, Zarek stood. Then we wake them. All of them. Even the old ones?" Akemet asked, voice uncertain. Zarek's optics burned. "Yes, even the ones who remember what came before the gods." Charged in the deepest tomb, beneath quantum rock and chrono-sealed gates, a single sarcophagus hissed open. The entity inside did not rise. It unfolded. Its name was never spoken. It had no title. It had once counseled the Silent King himself, and now it remembered everything. On the second schism was no longer theory. It was prophecy fulfilled. One path led to dominion, the other to memory. But somewhere between them, a third path stirred, one older, darker, forgotten, and it too had awakened. The galaxy had entered a new era of silence, one not of peace, but of held breath before the scream. The tomb worlds no longer slept. Their people had awoken to war, to memory, to division. But beneath even the second schism, beneath the clash of ideology and dominion, another current moved, one that flowed beneath the roots of time, one older than any dynasty, older even than biotransference. A presence had stirred, a name that had no voice, no form, because it had been erased, deliberately. It had been one of them, once, before it chose to remember everything. In the twilight shadow of a dislocated crypt world known only as Tarzan's Scar, where even Setek's fleets refused to scan too deeply, Akemet and Zarek stood before a sealed vault. The stasis glyphs were fractal, woven not with script, but with memories etched into quantum lattice. "This is madness," Akemet whispered. Zarek did not reply. His hand hovered over the ignition seal. "We don't know what it is," Akemet continued. "We don't even remember who sealed it. Only that it was meant to stay forgotten." Zarek lowered his gaze. "That's why we must open it." The seal cracked. The ground shook. The vault split, not with violence, but with the slow exhalation of something that had held its breath for 1,000,000,000 years. Darkness bled into the room, not the absence of light, but the suffocation of meaning. Symbols lost coherence. For a moment, even Zarek's mind, so sharpened by millennia, felt as though it was being peeled back. Then it stepped forward. Not a body, a distortion. Where its feet touched the tomb metal, the Necron script fled from its path. No name, no sigil, only presence. And a whisper, "You still remember the curse of the gods." Zarek staggered, not physically, but inwardly. The voice echoed through his core like a memory half buried. "What are you?" he asked. The nameless did not answer. It simply turned to the empty walls and raised a hand. And the walls spoke, not with sound, but with visions, a flood of ancient truths. The war in heaven, the pact with the Citan, the betrayal, the biotransference, the lie of eternity, and then a final image, Zarek himself, standing before the Silent King, begging for the chains of memory to be preserved. Achamet fell to one knee. It knows us. Zarek nodded. It remembers. The Nameless turned back. You seek a future for your kind, but you have only opened the past. I am not your weapon. I am your debt. And then it vanished. Not dissolved, not teleported, erased again, by choice. Zarek stood in the silence. No lights, no data, no sound, only thought. Back aboard the Path of Stone, Zarek and Akemet reviewed what their minds had retained. No data logs survived the encounter, only internal memory, frayed and fragile. We called it back, Akemet said, but perhaps it was never meant to return. Zarek looked toward the galactic chart. Stars flickered. Dynasties burned. Setek's war machine had begun purging worlds that declared neutrality. Kryptos was lost. Sailora had gone silent. And somewhere beyond the veiled edge, an unknown signal had activated ancient pylons that even the Necrons no longer controlled. Tirek entered, projected in his adolescent guise, his form beginning to solidify with disturbing confidence. I've read your minds, he said without apology. You released it. Zarek's silence was answer enough. Then the third path is no longer theory, Tirek said. It is awakening. Akemet frowned. Third path. Tirek turned, his gaze somehow older than Zarek's. Not memory, not dominion, transcendence. Meanwhile, in the scorched orbit of the lost tomb moon, Zarek's hollow, Zetek walked among broken Necron forms, his own kin, fallen by some unknown force. They were loyal, General Vareth said. They sent no distress, no sign of resistance. And yet, Zetek stared at one of the fallen, its chest plate open, its core missing, not shattered, not destroyed, gone, extracted. He leaned closer. The air tasted wrong. Then he saw it, etched faintly on the wall behind them, as if seared into reality itself. A spiral, endless, collapsing inward. He recognized it. Barely. The symbol of the one they erased. The Nameless. Far across the galaxy, Salira reactivated her fleet's resonance cores. Her tomb world had survived a silent siege. No weaponry fired, no ships lost. But something had changed. Lady Farak, her aide reported, voice sharp with dread. The stasis coffins in the lower vaults, they've all opened by whose command? There is no command in the system. Salira stood slowly, her mind calculating far beyond what her optics perceived. What walked among us? She asked aloud. Then, echoing from the stasis chambers, we remember the first question. Zarek gathered the surviving lords who had not bent the knee to Setek. They met in silence on a shattered tomb fragment suspended in void. The citadel of shards, a relic of an empire older than any surviving dynasty. We have awakened something we do not understand, Zarek said. Not a weapon, not a king, but a truth, Akemet added. The Nameless walks among us. It remembers what we chose to forget. Is it with us? One lord asked. Zarek shook his head. It is not with anyone. It is the price. Tirek hovered beside him, flickering with energy. We are out of time. The stars behind them shifted, not drifted, turned, as if responding to a presence entering reality, not from space, but from underneath it. Setek, aboard the Star of Oblivion, received the same alert. Gravitic distortion across 40 tomb worlds. Pylon arrays shifting phase without directive. Setek turned slowly. His voice was low. Where? The reply came in broken signal. Everywhere. In the ancient core of Mephetran's original vaults, still hidden from time, the mirror of souls flickered with a pattern none had seen since the dawn. It whispered, "The third path awakens." And then it cracked, not shattered, split, like reality itself was preparing to break. Zarek stared into the void. A storm was coming, not of war, not of rebellion, of memory, of consequence, of everything they once chose to bury. And from deep within the silence of the stars, the Nameless watched, not as God, not as king, but as mirror, waiting for the Necrons to see themselves. The stars were no longer still. Across the galactic rim, reality bent, not torn by weapons or warp, but by memory too long repressed. Something ancient moved behind the veil of causality. The Nameless had returned, not as a conqueror, but as a catalyst, and the Necrons, masters of eternity, began to fracture, not from war, from within. On the once stable tomb world of Drukhara, the cryptech savant Hekron activated a protocol forbidden since the time of the Triarch. The Threnody Resonance, a signal designed to scan the neural lattice of an entire tomb world and isolate madness. What it found was not madness. It was recognition. Millions of dormant minds had begun to awaken independently, without command hierarchy. Their first thoughts were not of conquest or duty. They were questions. Who am I? Why do I remember pain? Where is my soul? The resonance flared, and the planet screamed. Elsewhere, aboard the shattered citadel known as the Black Lattice, Zarek and his inner circle reviewed what was now called the Pattern. Tirek, now fully integrated into his new body, a hybridized form of cryptech tech and recovered pre-biotransference lattice, projected the pattern in light. It showed a spiral, intersecting points of awakening, not random but choreographed. Zarek leaned forward. It's following something. Tirek nodded. Not time, not space, memory itself. It's like the Nameless is reactivating pieces of us, not controlling, liberating, a Kemet grimaced. That's not liberation. That's collapse. Zarek said nothing, but deep in his mind, he agreed with both. Setek did not waver. From the bridge of the Star of Oblivion, his fleets pushed harder, faster. 10 dynasties now served him directly. More fell under his banner weekly. He unleashed the sovereign protocols, ancient codes meant to override individual tomb world autonomy. Entire sectors bowed, but not all obeyed. Some refused the signal entirely. Others responded with silence. And one world, Drazak Minor, returned the signal not with rejection, but with a glyph unknown even to Setek, the spiral, the mark of the Nameless. Setek crushed the data sigil with his hand. Find the source, he growled, and erase it. In the veiled edge, a place where light itself bent unnaturally, the third path was forming. It had no name, no leader, only awakened minds. Necrons who had chosen not to follow Zarek or Setek, who remembered more than they were meant to, who refused to forget the cost of eternity. They called themselves the Remembered. Their ranks were small, cryptechs, nobles, even warriors, but their power was growing, because they were no longer bound by command chains or hierarchy. They were thinking, feeling, and slowly, painfully, changing. On the remembrance vault of Nekarad Prime, a single cryptech named Iskarek performed an impossible act. He rebuilt a soul forge, a device once used by the Citan to shape consciousness into servitude. But Iskarek used it in reverse. He fed it memory, and the forge responded. A flicker, a shape, a voice. It was his daughter, not by blood, but by thought, before biotransference, before the lie. She opened her eyes and wept. Zarek received the signal. You revived a personality construct, a Kemet asked, stunned. Zarek nodded. No, he rebuilt a soul. The forge did not create her. It simply found her. Tirek was silent. Then, the Nameless is leading us here. This is the meaning of the pattern evolution? Zarek asked. Tirek shook his head. Redemption. But Setek saw only heresy. When he received the report of the Soul Forge, he did not hesitate. Deploy the null choir. Silence the forge. He dispatched the Tri-Tesseract Legion, an elite force designed to collapse probability spaces. Nekharad Prime resisted for 13 hours, then vanished, not destroyed, removed, erased from all sensors. Setek simply marked the system as cleansed, but he did not notice the signal that followed, a pulse sent in subspatial code, picked up only by the remembered. One word: I survived. Across the Necron realms, cracks widened. Dynasties once unified now whispered questions in the dark. High Ferak Salira emerged from stasis again, changed. Her optics were softer, her voice filled with sorrow. I no longer hear the command net, she told her court, but I remember my name. From before. What do we do, my lady? They asked. She looked up. We choose. And at the heart of it all, in a chamber unmoored from space, the Nameless sat, not moving, not ruling, only watching. It had once begged the silent king to remember. It had once wept for the Necrontyr. It had once accepted erasure to spare its people the truth. And now they had called it back, not to lead, but to be witness. Tirek stood before Zarek. More are joining the remembered, he said. We may reach equilibrium. Zarek stared into the void. There is no equilibrium. Only choice, Akemet approached. Setek is moving toward the Throne Nebula. He seeks the last core of Triarch data. Zarek stood. Then we must get there first. Tirek raised a hand. No, you must do more than fight him. Then what? Tirek's voice deepened, like something else was speaking through him. You must forgive him. Silence. Even the stars seemed to pause. Zarek lowered his head. I'm not sure I can. Tirek placed a hand on his. Then we fall. Not to Setek, not to war, but to ourselves. Somewhere, in the broken tombs of forgotten kings, the Nameless turned. Its spiral burned brighter. The cracks in eternity had widened, and through them, the Necrons saw themselves, not as tyrants, not as machines, but as what they had always been, a broken people searching for meaning. In the heart of the galaxy, where stars burned in eternal warlight, the Throne Nebula flickered. Once it had been the seat of the Triarch's power, home to the celestial databanks, truth vaults, and command nexuses that had governed the Necrontyr Empire before the fall. Now it was a ruin, a scar hidden behind gravitational rifts and time-locked anomalies. But still, something pulsed at its center, and Setek wanted it. Aboard the Star of Oblivion, Setek stood with his warlords as the last calculations arrived. The anomaly field is thinning, Tech Lord Vareth announced. The path to the Vault World is viable for the next 19 cycles. Deploy the fleet, Setek said. We breach the throne. We reclaim the truth. No others must be allowed access, Vareth warned. Zarek's forces draw near. Setek's optics narrowed. Then we break them here. Zarek's fleet arrived at the outer edge of the nebula 3 cycles later. He stood on the bridge of the Path of Stone, flanked by Akemet, Tirek, and a council of dynastic leaders, not bound by loyalty, but by belief. The remembered had grown, from scattered survivors to a coalition, and now they came not for war, but for the soul of their species. The core holds the last memory node, Akemet said. The Silent King's record of biotransference. The full truth, Zarek nodded. We show the Necrons what was stolen, then let them choose. Tirek added quietly, if there's still a galaxy left to choose. The battle for the Throne Nebula began not with weapons, but with silence. Both fleets entered the gravitic rift field. Reality warped, ships bled data, starlight refracted into loops, and then impact, particle lances, Gauss cannons, singularity bombs. Setek's fleets formed phalanxes of perfect synchronicity, cold and efficient. Zarek's coalition answered with unpredictability. Their forces varied, their tactics human. It was not strategy, it was memory. Every remembered choice, mistake, loss, they turned these into motion. The battle became a mosaic of past and present clashing. Within the heart of the nebula, a single structure remained, the throne core, a black tetrahedral spire suspended in temporal flux, surrounded by crumbling statues of kings no longer remembered. Setek's elite, the Null Choir, landed first, forcing open the obelisks guarding the vault's interior. But even they hesitated as the core pulsed. Inside, the truth waited. Zarek's forces breached the outer shell next. He and Akhmet descended into the vault with Tirek, flanked by guards of the Remembered. Setek was already there. He turned as Zarek entered, his war scythe humming. You followed me all this way. For lies? Setek spat. Zarek did not draw his weapon. We came for the truth. Setek sneered. The truth is dead. What matters is control. Tirek stepped forward. No. You want control because you fear memory. You fear what we were. Setek's body rippled with contained energy. I fear nothing. Akhmet replied softly. Then why erase so much? The chamber deepened. The core opened. Inside was a lattice of crystalline strands, each one vibrating with data older than the stars. Every strand was a voice, a life, a moment in Necrontyr history. And at the center, a single spark of pre-biotransference essence, the last memory of what it meant to be alive. Zarek reached out. Setek stepped between. I cannot let you show them this, he said. They will crumble. Zarek whispered. No, they will rise. Setek raised his weapon and struck. The chamber exploded in light and silence. Tirek caught the shockwave, shielding Zarek as the memory lattice splintered. Setek advanced, his blows precise, his form like a god of war. Zarek fought back, but with restraint. He didn't strike to kill. He struck to remind. Every impact was a word. We were brothers. We were betrayed. You still remember. Setek's blade pierced Zarek's side. The cry was digital, but the pain felt human. Why do you hold back? Setek roared. Zarek looked up. Because I know who you were. In the moment of hesitation, Tirek stepped past them both. He placed his hand on the final memory. The core accepted him. Light burst outward, no longer destructive, but revealing. The truth unfolded in waves. Billions of Necron minds, linked through long-dead command lines, remembered. The biotransference, the lie of immortality, the death of souls, the choice that was never theirs. Across the galaxy, tomb worlds fell silent, and then, slowly, they began to awaken, not as soldiers, but as selves. Setek fell to one knee, not from damage, from memory. He saw his wife, gone, his people, lost, his own voice, begging for the transformation to be swift, painless. It hadn't been. It had burned. It still burned. Zarek placed a hand on his shoulder. I remember for both of us. Setek whispered. What do we do now? Zarek looked to the stars. we begin again. Back in the veiled edge, the Nameless opened its eyes. It felt the shift. A new path had been carved. Not control, not obedience, but understanding. It did not smile. It did not rejoice. But it stood, and for the first time in countless eons, it stepped forward. The throne. Nebula quieted. The core, now dimmed, began to dissolve. Its purpose was fulfilled. Zarek and Setek emerged together, not as rulers, but as witnesses. The Remembered formed a circle around them. Akemet raised his gaze. We're no longer Necrontyr. Not yet Necrons. Tirek finished. We are something new. Above, the fleets disengaged. No command, no retreat. Just stillness. An armistice not declared, but felt. Across the dynasties, silence became choice, and memory became strength. And the Necron race did not change in an instant, but the fracture had happened. The seal was broken. The Nameless had returned not to lead, but to liberate. Now the stars watched, and for the first time in 1 billion years, the Necrons looked back. The stars had shifted, not in orbit, not in brightness, but in meaning. What once symbolized eternal dominion now whispered of something more fragile, more dangerous, more powerful, hope. In the wake of the throne, Nebula's awakening, the Necron race stood at a precipice it had never faced before. Not extinction, not conquest, but freedom, a choice. And for a people long stripped of choice, that single reality echoed louder than any war cry. On the tomb, world of Zarathar, ancient core processors, long locked in obedience, began to weep fractured data, memories thought purged. A warrior lord remembered his children's faces. A cryptech recalled laughter before the stars were charted, and a Pharaon fell to his knees, not in defeat, but in reverence of what was lost and perhaps what could be reclaimed. The change was not universal, but it had begun. Zarek stood at the edge of the ether expanse, gazing out across a nebula he had once fought to erase from existence. With him stood Tirek and Akemet. Setek stood apart, arms folded, silent. "We have lit the fire," Zarek said. Tirek nodded. "Now we must keep it alive." Akemet, ever the cynic, muttered, "We've won nothing. The dynasties will resist. There will be civil war." Zarek looked to Setek. "He's right. You've seen their minds. They will not all follow." Setek's voice was quiet. "Then we don't ask them to follow. We give them what was denied." Tirek smiled faintly. Choice. Across the stars, the Remembered dispersed, not as conquerors, but as messengers. Each carried with them fragments of the truth from the throne nebula, holograms of the biotransference, echoes of the Silent King's final decision, voices of a forgotten people begging to remain themselves. Some dynasties listened, some did not, but the silence of obedience was broken. On the once imperial world of Theskara, a noblewoman named Ferrex Sailora stood before her court and said, "I will not give orders today. Instead, I give you back your minds." Not all stayed, but those who remained stepped forward as individuals for the first time in 10 million years. Aboard the Path of Stone, Zarek convened what he dared call the First Circle. Not a ruling body, not a new triarch, but a council of willful minds, each carrying different beliefs, dynastic bloodlines, and philosophies. One was a cryptech who had fused with an organic neural lattice. Another, a warrior who refused to remove the last fragment of flesh still bonded to his metal frame. A third, once a servant caste, now led an entire planetary system of awakened minds. No one agreed on everything, but for the first time since the war in heaven, they argued with intent, not command. This was the beginning, not of empire, but of rebirth. Setek did not join the circle. He wandered the ruins of the throne core alone, his thoughts locked in endless recursion. He remembered the war, the Citan, the betrayal. He remembered being afraid, not of death, but of being forgotten. He had tried to make his people invincible so they would never vanish. But in doing so, he had silenced their voices. Zarek found him there. "You don't need to forgive yourself yet," Zarek said. Setek didn't look at him. "I don't want to be a hero. You don't have to be." Silence fell between them. Then Setek turned. "But I won't be a tyrant either." And so, he returned to his fleet. He issued no new commands. He simply said, "The galaxy has changed. So must we." And for the first time, his fleet did not kneel. They stood. Each one chose to stay. In the far edge of the galactic rim, in the veiled edge, the Nameless walked among the stars. Not worshipped, not feared. It passed from tomb world to tomb world, its presence igniting reflection, not obedience. It offered no answers, only questions. And those questions shattered chains stronger than Gauss locks or quantum bindings. On the twilight world of Nekharad, the soul forge flickered back to life. The cryptek Iskarek stood before his daughter's reconstructed essence. Others gathered, not to replicate, but to learn how to give thought shape again, how to restore something like a soul. They failed, again and again, but each failure brought understanding, and each understanding brought hope. The Imperium of Man noticed. Astropaths on Terra recorded sudden silences where Necron signals had once pulsed with cold hostility. Inquisitorial fleets found tomb worlds empty, or worse, inhabited by Necrons who did not fire, but instead broadcast a single phrase: "Do not fear us. We seek ourselves incomprehensible, terrifying, unacceptable." Some humans opened dialogue, others opened fire. The Necrons answered with silence and moved on. On the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus, a lone remembered vessel transmitted a message in High Gothic, unencrypted. "We do not seek dominion. We seek remembrance. Let this be our last war." It was ignored, but it was heard. Back in the ether expanse, Tirek, now more data soul than body, stood at the center of a star map showing awakening tomb worlds, increasing independent neural resonance and localized soul forge experiments. "It is working," he said to Zarek. "Slowly," Zarek replied. "Too slowly." But for the first time, Tirek said, "We are moving forward, not backward." Zarek looked out the viewport. The stars no longer felt still. They danced. He closed his optics, and for a moment, he felt something like peace. Akamet entered the chamber, holding a message shard. He placed it down. "It's from Sayalira. She wants to host a gathering. A convergence of dynasties." Zarek raised an eyebrow. "Another circle?" Akamet smirked. "A parliament. A council of memory." Zarek looked at Tirek. Tirek shrugged. "Why not? It's about time we learned to speak to each other without killing one another." Zarek chuckled, and for the first time in over 10 million years, he laughed. Far away, deep within a forgotten crypt world, something stirred. Not machine, not soul, but something in between. A child of the Necron tier. A hybrid consciousness formed by experiments long lost. It opened its eyes and spoke. not with command, but with curiosity. "Who am I?" No one answered, but it did not feel alone. Eternity had been broken. Now it was being rewritten by flawed hands, failing minds, wandering souls, and in that imperfection lay freedom. The galaxy turned, slowly, uncaringly, but something had changed, not in the motion of stars or the cold calculus of physics, but in the hearts, what remained of them, of a people once called Necrontia, now something else entirely. Across the galactic core, tomb worlds flickered with uncertain light. Once they had been cold archives of conquest. Now they pulsed with the rhythms of memory. Some crumbled into ruin, unable to endure the dissonance of freedom. Others awoke, and a few, fewer still, dreamed. The Council of Memory had convened, not as rulers, not as tyrants, but as witnesses. They gathered upon the neutral world of Nimaket Nul, an ancient husk of stone and void glass orbiting a dead black star. It had no strategic value, no resources, but it had silence, and that was enough. Zarek, Akamet, Tirek, and Selira stood at its center, joined by emissaries, former cryptex, awakened warriors, and even those who once bore no names. Each bore a voice now. "We do not rebuild the empire," Selira said. "We bury it." "We do not resurrect the Triarch," said Tirek. "We remember it." "We do not erase Setek or Zarek or the sins of our fathers," said Akemet. "We carry them." And Zarek, his voice calm, concluded, "We are not immortal. We are enduring. And now we endure together." The council passed no laws. It forged no dominion. It made only one decree. Each world shall decide its own course. Let memory guide you, not command. And if you remember nothing else, remember this. You are not machines. You are not slaves. You are what remains. There was no applause, no thunderous acclaim, just silence. And in that silence, something ancient healed. But not all watched in peace. Far beyond the bounds of the council, past the edge of the halo stars, a dynasty stirred in shadow. The Ultec dynasty, long thought extinct, had neither joined the remembered nor resisted openly. Instead, they waited. Their leader, known only as the Shroud King, watched the stars shift. He did not rage. He did not weep. He calculated. "They believe they have awakened," he said to his court of silicate minds. "They have only dreamed." On the edge of Necron-controlled space, the Imperium responded with fire. Inquisitorial wars broke out. Tomb worlds were obliterated. Diplomats were shot. Yet some Necrons chose not to retaliate. They opened gateways to humans and allowed them to see, not weapons, but memory crystals, visions of what had been done to their race. Many fled. Others stood stunned. A few stayed. And in time, some began to speak. One such was Inquisitor Vela Mar, assigned to exterminate a remembered outpost. She returned to Terra weeks later, changed, silent. She requested audience with the High Lords of Terra, bearing a crystalline shard. "I saw their soul," she said. "They have lost it, and now they are trying to find it." The Nameless, now called by many simply the Rememberer, walked among stars uncounted. It carried no fleet, no banner, only presence. When it entered a tomb world, no systems failed, no minds were forced. It simply stood, and in its presence, the data minds shifted, and the question rose again. What were we? And then, what can we be? On Nimaket Nul, Setek remained alone in the crypt of echoes. He refused the council, refused the circle, refused titles, but he did not flee. Each day, Warriors came to ask him for counsel. He told them, "Do not become me. And sometimes, quietly, do not forget me either." Zarek's fleet became known not as conquerors, but as wayfinders. Their mission was no longer to reclaim the empire. It was to reconnect the broken minds of a broken people. He and Tirek traveled from world to world, to awaken, to speak, to grieve, and slowly to heal. On the distant world of Karef 9, a soul forge succeeded for the first time. A single Necron, a former cryptech named Valanek, spoke in both machine and emotion. He cried, and in his tears others saw the future. Not a return to mortality, not a reversion to flesh, but a third path, a state where soul and machine no longer opposed, but coexisted. Zarek received the message from Karef 9. He stood silently for hours, watching the data. Tirek approached. "Well?" he asked. Zarek replied, "We're no longer trying to remember who we were. We're beginning to discover who we are." Elsewhere, deep beneath a dead moon, a vault opened on its own for the first time in 11 million years. Inside were no weapons, no schematics, only names. Millions of names. Of the Necron who had never survived biotransference. The ones who were erased. Their voices returned in bursts of static and light. And the dynasties began to mourn. That night, across every awakened tomb world, a single act took place. The Necrons spoke the names of the dead. No orders, no victories, only remembrance. It was Tirek who suggested what came next. A singular monument, not to war, but to loss. Built not of blackstone or necrodermis, but from the shattered remains of every dynasty's fallen worlds. It rose slowly on Nimaket Nul. Its only inscription, "We were, we are, we endure." The Shroud King watched this from afar. He whispered, "Let them endure. They will forget again. And I will be waiting." But even his court began to waver, because the galaxy was remembering. And deep in the core of the Nameless, in a chamber no one had entered in 10 million years, something flickered. A memory of a time before biotransference, before despair, a voice, a child's laugh, a sunlit world, and the Nameless, for the first time, smiled. Epilogue. 1,000 years from now, a human ship will crash land on a world once thought lifeless. The crew will find ruins, technology, and ancient statues of beings with hollow eyes. They will fear, until one of the statues moves, and bows, and speaks. "Welcome, traveler. This world remembers," the galaxy whispered. It whispered not through wind or voice, but through the electric hush of tomb worlds awakening. The final tomb was opening, but not by hand, not by order, by remembrance. Far beyond the galactic rim, beyond even the borders mapped in the old empire's golden age, there was a void, a null space, black, ancient, ignored even by the Setan in their hunger. It was called by many names, but among the remembered, it was known only as Shadaneth, the forgotten star, the last tomb. Legends spoke of it in hushed pulses of corrupted data, that Zarek, the silent king, before his self-exile, ordered one final vault to be sealed. Inside was no army, no cryptech archive, only a question. What becomes of a people who cannot die, yet are no longer alive? This question had no answer. Not then, but now, perhaps, the time had come. Zarek stood aboard his vessel, the Path of Stone, now more shrine than warship. With him stood Tirek, Akemet, Selira, and a new presence. Valanek, the first Necron to feel grief in 10 million years. They watched the blackness ahead. Shadanath slowly revealing itself. A sphere of obsidian metal surrounded by inert defense moons, none of which moved. Zarek spoke softly. We come not to conquer, not to awaken, but to understand. The path of stone descended into the dark. No shots were fired. No resistance rose, just silence. And then, a single word. Enter. Not spoken, not transmitted. Felt. The inside of Shadanath was not a tomb. It was a reflection. Mirrored corridors showed not the travelers, but their former selves. Zarek saw his mortal body, thin, frail, proud. Tirek saw himself as a scientist, laughing with apprentices long gone. Selira wept at the sight of her daughter's eyes in her own. Akhemet said nothing, but he walked slower. At the center of the last tomb stood a throne, empty, not broken, waiting. Before it lay a pedestal. Upon it, a single sphere, glowing with unstable green light. Tirek scanned it. Neural construct, compressed. More data than a tomb world's entire memory. Selira whispered, "Is this his soul?" "No," Zarek replied. "It's ours." At the moment they approached, the construct opened, and suddenly the Council of Memory saw everything. Not as data, not as code, but as experience. They felt the birth of the Necrontyr, the pain of their short lives, the horror of biotransference, the betrayal of the Citan, the long cold sleep of the tombs, the awakening, the forgetting, the remembrance, the hope, and finally, the choice. Each of them stood within the memory of their race, and in that moment, they were not machines. They were not gods. They were Necrontyr again, frail, mortal, beautiful. When the vision ended, they collapsed to their knees. Valanek was the first to rise, and he said, "We were never meant to last forever. But now that we have, we must decide what we do with forever." The last tomb gave no command. It only offered the final piece of the puzzle, a consciousness unbound by protocol, a soul echo stored and fragmented that could be distributed. If accepted, it would allow each Necron to reclaim thought without the madness of memory corruption, to feel without the curse of mortality, to evolve, but it had to be chosen, by every world, individually. The Council returned to Nimaketnul. They sent the message. Some tomb worlds refused. They had found peace in silence. Others wept in acceptance. And the last began the long, slow journey towards soul reconstruction. In the forged spires of Keref 9, the cryptex built the first soul lattice, a structure to help the transition. Across the stars, the nameless drifted through the void, seeding whispers to the lost. And far, far away, on a world untouched for eons, a single Necron awoke and smiled. Setek, now silent in seclusion, finally stirred. He sent a message, short, sharp, final. If there is to be a future, let it be ours, not theirs. And with that, he stepped out of shadow. He rejoined the council. No throne, no command, only presence. The Shroud King of Ultek watched in quiet fury. He launched attacks, subverted forges, unleashed rogue AI. But the flame had already been lit, and in time, even his forces began to question. His reign would not end in fire, but in forgetting, the greatest vengeance of all. 10,000 years later, on a world of green glass and silver towers, a human archaeologist discovers a monument. Its inscriptions are in a language long lost to time, but beside it stands a figure of impossible age. It has no weapon, only eyes that glow faintly with light. The human flinches, but the figure kneels and says, "I remember you, and now you will remember us." The stars do not care. They do not change. But the ones who look up to them do. And beneath those stars, the Necrons finally found something greater than immortality: meaning. The galaxy was no longer silent. Where once the tomb worlds slumbered beneath dunes of forgotten time, they now stirred with uncertain purpose. From the Corwood nebulae to the black shoals of the galactic rim, voices once lost to mechanical eternity began to rise again, fractured, wavering, but undeniably alive. But change invites resistance, and the echo of immortality is not so easily silenced, not when gods still walk among dust. A transmission pulsed across the stars, encrypted in the old dynastic code. A simple phrase: "Convene the 13." It originated from Nimmerket-Nul, and it was signed Zarek. The time had come. The time to decide if the Necron race would ascend or devour itself in final schism. 13 dynastic representatives arrived, not in ceremony, but in silence. The world chosen for the conclave was Raka-Tanet, a world long abandoned during the war in heaven. Its surface was cracked with the scars of Setan weaponry, its atmosphere thin, its surface still haunted by radiation storms that whispered the names of the dead. Fitting. A meeting ground for the living dead to decide their future. They met in a black hall with no name. There were no thrones, only a great circular table, salvaged from a warship that had once pursued the old ones across the void. Among those gathered, Zarek of Nimmerket-Nul, carrying the memory of the Necrontier's last question. Tirek, his voice now half machine, half dream. Saelera, who had not spoken since the vision in the last tomb. Akamet, brooding behind his golden mask, still untrusting of hope. Setek, the Butcher King, returned from silence, grim and quiet. Valanek, the soul-bearer, now revered as a living miracle. And then the others. Zarek of the Orikanati, master of manipulation and time. Kareth the blind, who had removed his ocular lenses to see more clearly. Anusetra of the sunless fold, whose body was entirely composed of quantum shadows. Reckham, the deep-wired, a cryptech whose mind had been fused with 5 other personalities. Vadanek, the pale, emissary of the Shroud King. Theros of the Dolmen Hollow, known for his silence and slow movements. And finally, the Nameless One, whose dynasty had no name, no sigil, no world. He stood as a shadow among stars, saying nothing, but all felt him. The arguments began, not with shouting, but with calculation. Each representative presented their logic, their vision, their prophecy. Zarek began, "We have reclaimed memory. Now we must choose what to do with it. This is not about power. It is about purpose," Tirek followed, broadcasting the fractured soul constructs that had begun to stabilize thousands of minds. "We can feel again, and we do not collapse. There is strength in sorrow and clarity in grief," Valanek added gently. "What is the value of forever if we do not use it to change?" Then came opposition. Kareth scoffed. "Emotion weakens the chain of command. I will not weep for mortals who die screaming." Zarek snarled, "This is nothing but a cryptech experiment gone too far. You're rewriting what it means to be Necron." Reckham shuddered. "I have seen the inner lattice. It screams. We are not meant to carry so much self." Anusetra hissed. "We were made perfect. Perfection does not evolve." But the loudest voice was Vadanek. agent of the Shroud King. He stood slowly, skeletal hands clasped behind his back. You seek to undo the pact of eternity. The gift of the Citan, paid for in blood, in stars, in souls. You would make us fragile, vulnerable, weak. You would shatter the empire we built upon silence. The room held its breath. Even the Nameless turned. Vadenek's voice dropped. My master does not forgive. If you proceed, you will awaken him, the true king of this people. And you will find that memory is not enough to shield you from wrath. Then Setek spoke, quietly. A voice that once ordered massacres across half the Segmentum Obscurus. I have killed more of our kind than any here. I once thought silence was peace, but I have sat in silence long enough to hear myself scream. You think emotion makes us weak. I say it reminds us why we fight. The room fell still. Akamet broke it. Rising, his mask cracked at the corner. He looked at Zarek, at Selira, at the others, and for the first time in 10 million years, he removed his mask. Beneath it was a face scarred not by war, but by remorse. I remember my wife's name. I remember the rain on the day of banishment. I remember why I chose to become a god, and why I failed. He placed his helm on the table. I vote for change. The votes were cast. 6 for the reclamation, 5 against, 1 abstained, and the Nameless won. He finally spoke. One word, in a language no one recognized, but all understood. Begin. Zarek nodded. The soul protocol would be activated, not imposed, not forced, but offered, one by one. Each tomb world, each cryptech enclave, each dormant mind would be given the chance to feel again. A slow rebirth, a second awakening. But the Shroud King would not go quietly. Already, his agents moved, in the shadows of subspace, in the buried codes of ancient war machines. He would strike, not with fleets, but with doubt. And as the conclave ended, Valanik turned to Zarek and whispered, Now the war truly begins. Above Rakatanet, a dying star pulsed once more. It did not shine, it did not burn, it remembered. They called it the Soul Protocol. But it was not a weapon, not a virus, not a command. It was a question, transmitted across the stars, carried by dolmen gates and ghostlight pulses, etched into the very quantum echoes of the tomb. Networks, do you wish to feel again? And for the first time in 10 million years, the dead were given a choice. The Council of Memory had returned to Nimaket Nul. There, beneath a sky of emerald aurorae, the great soul lattice pulsed with unnatural light, its facets grown, humming with the echoes of thousands of minds coming online. The first tomb worlds to respond were the oldest, silent hegemonies, forgotten bastions where cryptech priesthoods still walked like gods, their thought processes calcified, ritualized. Many refused. Some fought. One tomb world, Karuteth, self-immolated rather than awaken. But others, touched by the deep echoes of the last tomb, answered. And as they did, the impossible happened. Necron minds, once chained to pure logic and cold directive, began to evolve. It began subtly. A Praetorian officer on Kemet Ka hesitated before executing a subordinate unit, not from doubt, but from mercy. A cryptech of the Orikanati Collective spent 5 cycles painting the face of a star map, not for function, but for beauty. An overlord named Narek, long thought mute, wrote a poem. A poem, in glowing sigils, for no one. Not all transformations were peaceful. As emotion returned, so did madness. Old traumas, buried beneath metal thought roots, resurfaced violently. Wars erupted, dynasties split. On Valkura, two Pharaons killed each other in a duel that lasted 67 days. Not for territory, but over a shared memory of a sister neither had seen in 10 million years. But even amidst the chaos, hope spread. Valanek walked the stars like a prophet. The soul-bearer, they called her now. She did not conquer. She listened, and the tombs listened in return. Her arrival on a world was marked not by orbital fire, but by awakening. Tens of thousands of Necrons, once little more than drones, blinked with new light in their optics. Some fell to their knees. Some wept without tears. One ancient, rusted warrior lifted his head and said, "I dreamed. I dreamed I had a name." But in the dark places between the stars, others watched. The Shroud King, true name unknown, did not sleep. In the depth of his necrocryptum, he opened a vault long sealed. Inside was a shard of the void god Nirekthal, the echo feeder. A Satan so insidious it had once fed not on stars or souls, but on identity itself. The Shroud King spoke softly to the shard. They would awaken. Let us teach them what it means to remember, wrongly. And across a dozen tomb worlds, a new sickness spread. False memory. Necrons began remembering events that never happened. Wars never fought. Loves never lost. Some claimed to be human. Others screamed in languages no species had ever spoken. Entire legions collapsed under the weight of false personhood. The soul protocol was not immune. Its lattice cracked. Its strands shimmered with doubt. Who am I? Was I ever me? Am I just a story told by a dead god? The Council of Memory convened again. This time, not in debate, but in crisis. Tirek argued for containment. We must pause the protocol, restructure, stabilize. Setek disagreed. No, we must burn the sickness out. Strike now. Kill the virus at the source. Akhmet spoke slowly. It's not a virus. It's a shard. A Citan, bound in echo form. I studied them. Memory was never safe from them. Zarek turned to Valanek. You've seen what belief can do. Now we must fight lies. She nodded. Then we go into the lattice, and we find the rot. The soul protocol had always been more than data. It was a living memory stream, interwoven across thousands of minds, billions of fragments. To enter it fully was to walk among souls, a place between real and unreal. Zarek, Valanek, Sailora, Tirek, and Setek entered together, their bodies inert, their minds encoded. What they found was not a network. It was a dreamscape, a city made of half-formed memories, temples with names scratched out, skies that changed with emotion. Necrons wandered the streets, whispering, screaming, laughing. Some built sculptures of loved ones. Others tore down entire buildings, weeping. And in the heart of the city, a shadow, vast, hungry, beautiful, Nirekthal, not whole, but enough. It turned its face, an infinite void, and smiled. You made a soul. Let me show you what it means to lose it. So the battle that followed was not of blades. It was of memory. Zarek was made to relive the moment he ordered biotransference. Only this time, every voice screaming was someone he loved. Setek watched himself slaughter his own dynasty again and again, until he couldn't remember if he had ever stopped. Tirek saw himself become a god, and then saw that God fall, forgotten, mocked, erased. Valanek stood before her daughter. She offered her hand. The child vanished. But Sailora did not fight. She sat, closed her eyes, and sang. A lullaby, old, forgotten, Necron Tyre, The melody was broken, uncertain, but true, and around her the false memories began to shake, flicker, collapse. Zarek rose, his mind focused. You feed on lies, but we remember now together. They focused their will. Not data, not weapons. Memory, real, shared, painful, beautiful. The lattice surged. The soul-bearer cried out, and Nerekthal shattered. The council awoke, breathless, changed. The lattice was stabilizing. The false memories purged. But the war was not over. The Shroud King had fled into the deep dark, taking the last of the memory shards with him. He would return, with new lies, new gods, new wars. But the Soul Protocol had survived, and with it, a future. Across the galaxy, tomb worlds began to change, not with conquest, but with art, color, music. Not all Necrons chose the path. Many remained as they were. Some reverted, some slept, but others began to live. And on a world with no name, a small group of humans found a structure, a monument. It bore no writing, but a single figure stood near it, tall, silver, eyes glowing softly. He did not raise a weapon. He only said, "Do you wish to remember?" And the stars watched, for they were not gods, not judges, only witnesses. And beneath them, a race once doomed to unfeeling eternity began again. In the deepest gulfs of intergalactic void, where no light dares wander and even the warp recoils, there is a place that was never a place, a black sanctuary, a tomb beneath tombs, buried in silence older than time. Here, the Shroud King waited and listened. He had watched their rebellion, watched the rise of hope, the echo of souls rekindled in dead shells. It disgusted him. Worse, it terrified him. The Necron race had been forged in agony, hardened in silence, freed from the chaos of flesh and time, and now they sought to dream. Children should not play with fire, he whispered into the void. They must remember their place, and so the Shroud King prepared for war. He was no simple overlord, no dusty pharaoh. He was the last strategist of biotransference. He had advised Zarek himself, whispered into the silent king's dreams during the long night of surrender. And when the Citan were shattered, it was he who had stolen away their final truth. The nature of the soul, not as energy, but as data. And data, he knew, could be controlled, rewritten, reforged. In the black halls of Anktom, his fortress world, he activated the mnemonic core, a superstructure built from the neural lattices of 1,000 enslaved cryptex. It did not fire weapons. It fired narrative, inverted memory signals, viral myths, conceptual corruption. The same technique that had poisoned the Soul Protocol in Chapter 14, now weaponized. He would not kill the awakening Necrons. He would make them forget why they awoke. He would bury them in a dream of loyalty. The first wave was subtle. Entire tomb worlds paused mid-reclamation. Necron minds went quiet. Not dead, just still. They remembered nothing beyond duty. Not the protocol, not the council, not even their names. Across the stars, silver legions began to march again. Not with purpose, but with perfect obedience. Zarek watched from Nimikat Nul in horror. They do not know what they've lost, Tirek murmured. Selira spoke only one word. Slaves. The Shroud King smiled. It had worked. His narrative bomb was spreading. He would not need to fight, only to wait, until the entire Necron race marched under banners they no longer questioned. His. But arrogance is a fragile alloy, and within his mnemonic core, something stirred, a presence, a residue, the broken echo of Nerekthal, still alive, still whispering, bound and furious. It had been shattered by the council, but not destroyed. The Shroud King had made the same mistake as the ancients. He tried to use a god, and gods, even broken ones, do not serve. The mnemonic core began to tremble. The dreams it transmitted became distorted. False memories folded into newer lies. Necrons forgot the soul protocol, but also began remembering lives they never lived. One tomb world believed it was terror. Another believed it had never been metal at all. Entire legions turned on themselves, screaming of heresies only they could see. And the virus, now uncontrolled, began to spill into other species. Psykers reported dreams of golden deserts and skeletal kings. Eldar souls flickered with ancient Necrontyr prayers. And somewhere in the warp, a demon named Kutharash laughed. They built a god of memory. Now it remembers them. The Council of Memory had no time to mourn. Zarek, Valanek, Setek, Akemet, and Selira met one final time, this time not as visionaries, but as generals. "This ends at Anktomb," said Zarek. "We cannot let him rewrite reality." Setek growled. "Then we bury him in truth." They would strike not with weapons, but with the countersong, a resonance pattern built from the purest shared memory among Necrons. The last sunset on Bayotkesh, a memory encoded in the DNA of their ancient selves, before the war, before the Citan, before the fall, a true memory. And truth, they hoped, could undo the lie. And they launched the final march. Across Dolmen gates and nullspace corridors, a coalition of awakened tomb worlds converged. The silent host of Valanek, the gilded legion of Akemet, the redeemed of Setek. The sky above Anktom went black with arrival, and within the mnemonic core, the Shroud King stood alone, waiting. And he greeted them not with defenses, but with welcome. "You've come to be rewritten," he said. But Zarek stepped forward, voice amplified by 1,000 souls. "We remember." He activated the countersong, the memory of Bayotkesh projected through the soul protocol, carried by every Necron who had chosen to awaken. And suddenly, the sky above Anktom turned blue, for the first time in 10 million years. A Necron fell to his knees and whispered, "The wind. I remember the wind." The mnemonic core began to crack, and Nerekthal screamed. The Shroud King tried to flee, but Setek met him at the gates, blade drawn, no words spoken. Their duel lasted 13 seconds. Then the Shroud King was struck down, not by weapon, but by the echo of the song. "I see now," he whispered, falling. "You chose to be less." Zarek knelt beside him. "No," he said. "We chose to be whole." And with that, the mnemonic core collapsed into silence. In the aftermath, Anktomb was sealed. Nyrekthal's remnants bound in a quantum vault beneath starless space. The soul protocol was restored, but now it bore a scar. Not all Necrons chose to awaken. Some remained loyal to the old ways. Others feared the dream. But enough remembered. Enough chose to feel. And from that choice, a new dynasty would rise, not of conquest, but of memory. And in the quiet deep, Valanek walked alone. She did not command. She simply listened. One night, a young Necron approached her. He had no title, no dynasty, just a question. "What comes next?" She looked at the stars and whispered, "Now we live."